Right, so greetings, hello. Yes, welcome to the Philosophy Club. And there's been a lot happening in the world. In my personal life, I've been on my travels. And so I'll be sharing some of that. And we can discuss the state of the world, what we can do about it. So I want to start with, firstly, a reflection on the Middle East, the elusive peace in the Middle East. In the UK, it's very interesting, the getting up ready for the recognition of Palestine by the Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and what that means. There's a lot of disinformation appearing in the media, which is, this is a terrible thing, it's going to be the worst thing ever. We don't want a terrorist state on our borders, saying Israeli leaders and influential people in the UK are all adopting that line. Other people are saying no, steady as she goes. France, Canada, Britain are all set to recognise Palestine in September. Now, this will be at the context of the annual meeting at the UN headquarters in New York, where heads of state or their second in command go to the UN General Assembly and give a talk. Now, I always watch this. It's like an annual ritual. World Peace Day, September the 21st. So it's an appropriate time. I believe that the French, Canadian, British, and probably others leaders will, make a speech saying we're recognising Palestine. I think it's long overdue. I was active in the peace movement in the 90s when we used to have meetings in Hampstead between Jewish intellectuals and Palestinian intellectuals, and we would all meet up at my friend's house, and we all got on famously. It was when the Oslo Peace Agreement had been signed, the Norwegians had catered that, and we all felt that was the Middle East solution had happened. But then Rabin got assassinated, and Israeli politics shifted to the right, and extreme lunatic types took over, with a very retrogressive type of Zionism associated with Jabotinsky, which was the Iron Wall concept. Don't give an inch to the Palestinians, make Israel a completely separate domain, and gradually, force them out. And sadly, that's what Netanyahu's been doing ever since, and represents that tradition, and in the Likud party. So we are where we are. I had a visitors today, three Franco-Israeli people, one of whom lives in Jerusalem, one is studying at Tel Aviv, and one goes back and forth between France and Israel. They came round the Peace Museum, and we had some very interesting talks about the state of play. I'm going to be saying in my own little way what I think is that what Britain and France and Canada and all the other countries should have been doing all along is supporting the Israeli peace movement, the moderates. We should have been helping moderates on both sides, both in Palestine and in Israel, as we were doing in the 90s when I was based in London. Because there are, I think, the vast majority of Israelis and the vast majority of Palestinians want peace. They wanted a two-state solution from the beginning, actually. And it's only the military types and the terrorist groups and the extremists that have been causing trouble on both sides. You've got the Hamas types and you've got the Likud types. And to me, they're both adopting the gun, the bayonet, the bomb, and have been since the beginning. So what was refreshing to talk to my Israeli peace activists is, no, there's a whole other Israel, alternative Israel, that wants peace with Palestine, never wanted this extremism to erupt as it has done. I think we should, so it's not just a question of recognising Palestine, it's recognising our mistake in helping weaponise the extreme right of Israeli politics. Now, the Tory party in Britain has associated itself with that, sadly and tragically. Starmer and the Labour Party should distance themselves, and they are doing, and they're saying, no, we want a moderate Israel living in peace and harmony with a moderate Palestine. How are we going to get there? That's for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, which I set up when I went and interviewed people in Israel and Palestine back in the 90s, 2000s. And we were talking about this today. There's a peace group in Israel called Standing Together, which this friend is part of. They meet in Jerusalem, and they are both Palestinian, whether Muslims or Christians or Jewish people. They're all working together for one peace between two recognised states. So I think the direction of travel is correct, that Starmer's pursuing, and the people I was talking to in the UK agree with it. And then I want to pivot towards Ukraine and Russia, because obviously my plan is that we can solve these two problems at once. I want an immediate ceasefire truce peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And then I want them to be part of a peace flotilla, a peace initiative under UN auspices. And Russia's on the UN Security Council, to authorise a proper aid flotilla, not just dropping a few pallets from the sky, although that's good and I support any kind of aid getting into Gaza, but I want proper massive aid to go in, like a Marshall Plan for Palestine and Gaza, as part of recognising a Palestinian state. No point recognising something and then, letting them all stay and be bombed and we have to help rebuild Palestine and rebuild Gaza, and that should be a huge international effort. Anyway, I want to report I had an interesting synchronicity. I was in Paris late last night, waiting for a bus to come back to La Creuse, and I met a young philosophy student, as one does in Paris, and she was also getting a bus, only she was going to London, where I'd just come from, and she was studying philosophy at the University of Heidelberg, and we talked about philosophy and the state of philosophy in Germany. There's only 4 philosophy professors left at the University of Heidelberg, she was telling me, and but she herself, fascinatingly, a German, of her father's Russian, her mother's Ukrainian, and she speaks fluent German and is brought up living in Germany, but from mixed Ukrainian-Russian ancestry. And I was thinking, gosh, that's what I'm talking about. We need Russia and Ukraine to work together. And she was saying, well, maybe I can go and give a lecture in Heidelberg, and the philosophy department might be interested in my work, because they're very interested in Kant's legacy as a peace thinker, peace intellectual, and she's been writing essays and studying him. And I've been teaching Kant for years, and so that was just a wonderful meeting at late night in Paris. And then after she got her bus, then I met someone else who was from Argentina, and extraordinary conversation. Late night conversations in Paris are wonderful. He was a young man with his partner, and they had a farm in Patagonia, southern Patagonia, and very happily, and they live towards the Cordilleras, where like the foothills of the Andes, in the southern bit of Argentina, and a few months ago it got unseasonably hot. Global warming is striking Latin America, and their part of the mountains all caught fire. And their farm was completely engulfed in a forest fire because it was nestled in a forest, and the entire forest went up in flames. They had to flee to a neighbouring property who was better organised, and they managed to put out the flames after 2 days of fighting the fire. He had trimmed the trees so they weren't right immediately by the house. But my friend lost all his possessions, and everything, his entire life, went up in flames. So what did he do? Well, he's joined a circus. He's a circus acrobat, and he goes by the name of Coco the Clown. And he's now joined a circus called Circus I Love You, which has been touring Europe. They just have done a performance circuit in Sweden. He'd flown in just the day before from Sweden to France, and they're going to be touring France, starting in September. We had fascinating conversation about Britain, Argentina, circuses, death, tragedy. He told me about the tragedy of his farm being torn, engulfed in flames. I told him about my dear daughter, her tragedy. And he was just a marvellous chap to meet in the middle of the night. When I was in London and Brighton and Sussex, visiting things connected with Sophia, my daughter, went to her garden, which she had in the back of her flat, which has now been essentially abandoned. I rescued a few more things from it. A wonderful Buddha statue, a smiling gold and white Buddha, which is now, one of my prized possessions. And I have to say, I did go to the Brighton and Hove Spiritualist church, because it was a chance on Monday. They had quite a well-known medium there. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, Sophie will send me a message. Because I've been to these spiritualist churches before, when I lived in Poole, and, they have visiting mediums that talk. This chap was a fascinating guy called Stephen Tickle, great name, who was a shaman and a medium. He's trained. And I was praying that he would get some message from Sophie, that would be like clinching evidence. Dad, don't worry, I'm okay, I'm, in a special part of heaven, etc., etc. But no, nothing, zilch. No message from Sophie. Yeah. He got messages for 5, 6 other people in the audience. That's lovely, but... and I got this image of, there's a queue, obviously, people wanting to get a message through. I don't know the protocols. I would have thought Sophie should have had priority myself.
Thomas box 4.
I don't know what the protocols are for getting medium messages through, but anyway, she was probably too shy, knowing Sophie. It's not really her scene. She wouldn't queue up with a load of departed spirits wanting to get a message through to the Brighton and Hove Spiritualist Church. So I was slightly disappointed, however, so I can't report favourably, but it was an interesting experience, and it's a church on Edward Street down the road from my house where I grew up in Kent Town. And I'd all passed by hundreds of times on the bus and always wanted to go in, because it's a sort of modern building with curved walls, like a Steiner thing. And I'd always been intrigued since a little boy. And I finally got in. It's the first time I'd ever been in. And it is very beautiful. So if you live in the Sussex, Brighton region, do go in. They have a wonderful summer programme. And they have a Sunday service every morning at 11 o'clock each week. And they have on Mondays at 3 p.m, they have a visiting medium. So, I think one should approach this stuff with spiritual empiricism. If we should study what happens after death. It's fascinating. And it's going to happen to us all, so we might as well be prepared. So that was interesting. And I also have been exploring Worthing and doing a fascinating study and history of Worthing tour, because when I grew up in Brighton, we never really went to Worthing very much, but I went to the local library, the history library in Worthing, and discovered something interesting, that Brighton always had a slightly seedy reputation. It was the home of the Prince Regent, who built the Royal Pavilion, and who had his mistresses there, and it was the racy part of the royal family were in Brighton. But King George III's youngest daughter, Princess Amelie, went to Worthing on a health thing to be by the sea, but she didn't want to go to Brighton because it had this reputation. So she stayed in Worthing. And that really made Worthing as a town, because after that the aristocrat set would go down and realise it was a beautiful spot. It has the beach, it has beautiful air, and it was fresh, and it didn't have all the seediness of Brighton. So Worthing became a designer resort in the early 1800s, and it was recognised eventually as a town, but not till 1803 or something. And then all these beautiful Regency villas were built along the seafront, and many of them are still standing. And I discovered a wonderful doctor, Dr. Frederick Dixon. There's a blue plaque to him in Worthing, born in 1799. His father was a rector of a Sussex parish, and he trained with one of the best surgeons of the day, Sir Astley Cooper, at Guy's Hospital. Became a Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in 1821, married Maria Grant. They spent their honeymoon in the Eastern Mediterranean, visiting all the sites of Egypt and Corfu, and then they bought a house and settled in Worthing in 1827, when it was just up and coming. And he laid out the first dispensary, so like a kind of pharmacy giving medical advice. And his house became the first, medical dispensary in Worthing, and also a social centre, because he and his wife had musical soirees. He played the piano, and you can imagine 1820s, right? And the dispensary was established in 1829 to give healing to all the locals, whatever their wealth or social class. Kind of mini NHS, National Health Service. He was also a geologist, a fellow of the Geological Society, friends of the famous geologists of the day, Richard Owen, Charles Lyell, Roderick Murchison, who all knew Darwin. And he collected an amazing collection of Sussex fossils, which he had engraved and published a book called The Geology of Sussex. And he was a founder member of the Sussex Archaeological Society, established in Lewes in 1846. So, an amazing guy. He suddenly died at the age of 50 in 1849 from a fatal waterborne disease. And there was a huge funeral cortege went to him to see him buried in the Downs, like my daughter has just been done. So this is why I love history. It brings places to life, people and places, and the history of medicine is particularly fascinating to me as a historian.
A bit scary as well, I would say.
Well, it is, obviously, but I used to work in hospitals and have a great love of healing. I always feel that medical science and spiritual science should go together. That healing is not just the physical body, although that's critical. It's also the overall well-being of the patient, including their thoughts, their anxieties, their psychological condition. Anyway, Frederick Dixon would have made a great chap here in the Philosophy Club had he been alive. So the other thing I've been doing, I want to just share before we go on to our normal thing, is I've been reading the authorised biography of George Orwell, a figure that I've always been fascinated by, a sort of critical intellectual of an earlier generation. I believe, I'm coming to that bit, haven't got there yet, I believe he was a member of the, during World War II he was active, he was writing about his experiences in the Spanish Civil War, and I'm going to be learning a lot about him. But what I've learned so far is that he was a graduate of Eton College in Britain, and he was what's called a King's Scholar. Every year there's a competition for the brightest pupils throughout the British education system, and they get a free place at King's. They become what's called a King's Scholar. And when the school was set up in the 1400s by the then King, Henry VI, it was stipulated in the founding documents that 70 boys from throughout the UK would be educated there for free, and that's happened ever since. And he won the prize. It's a 2-day grueling exam to get into Eton, but he'd gone to a preparatory school in Eastbourne. He'd learned Latin and Greek, and he was a clever chap, young boy, like some of the boys I've taught, and he got the scholarship. He was one of the ones that got in that year. And it's fascinating, the account of his time at Eton. He didn't flourish at Eton. He didn't become a great scholar. He was always slightly aside from the pack, looking with his detached, observant eye at what was going on. And then after, he joined the India Police Department, because his father kept saying, you've got to get a job now, you've had a really great education. Get a job. And so he applied and was accepted into the Indian police force, which he accepted a posting in Burma, which was then part of the British Indian Raj. And he spent 5 years in Burma. And fascinating detail of his job. So within a couple of years, he's 21, 22, he's supervising the entire police workings of a region in Burma with 200,000 people, inhabitants. His job is to be in charge of all investigations into murder. There was the death penalty in place, so he would be responsible for the trials, the arrests, the investigations, and even the executions. He had to go and arrange all that as a young man. Now he found it very distasteful in the end, and he resigned after 5 years, saying, "I don't want to be a cog in the imperial machine. I don't want to be part of this tomfoolery." And he made a critical distance, and then he decided to see life from the other side, because he had an elite career for him mapped out. And his dad was very disappointed. He resigned and went to become a tramp down and out in London and Paris to see the proletariat, how they live, the poor, and to as an observer. He'd seen how the rich live, what they do, and now he wanted to see what the poor do. So, and a fascinating man. I will report back on more as I discover more. But this is a fantastic biography by Michael Sheldon, the critical authorised biography. And I've discovered there's a thing called the Orwell Prize, which is given to a writer, I think every year. And one chap that won it is this chap, Patrick Radden Keefe, Say Nothing, for this book, A True Story of Murder and Memory in Northern Ireland. And I've been involved in peace work in Ireland, setting up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, been there many times. And this chap has told, it's like a kind of novel, but it's all true, about the time of Troubles, the horrors on both sides, the murders, the brutality, the silencing, and the first victim is truth. You're not allowed to tell the truth in these situations. And it's the same in Gaza, Israel. All wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. This is a Vietnamese intellectual, Viet Thanh Nguyen, said that. So I'm really looking at this as a present from my friend Noah, who normally comes to the Philosophy Club. But he unfortunately, well, fortunately for him, is off at the Bach Festival. There's a festival here in France,
Bach?
dedicated to Johann Sebastian Bach's music, and he's gone there to help out with his brother. So thank you, Bach, well done, enjoy the music. I thought I would just, before we do our periodic table, I just want to take a random reading from the Gospel of St. Matthew, because I spent, this book was finished the day that we discovered my dear daughter's body, and it took so much work. I just want to share a random little snippet so you see what I've been up to. Here I'm talking about, it's a commentary on the entire text of the Gospel of Matthew. And here I'm talking about Matthew chapter 8, 1 to 13. And when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And he stretched out his hand and touched him and said, "I am willing, be clean." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to the people." And so on. And so I discuss here in the commentary, how was Jesus doing these miracles? What was happening here? Was he a faith healer, a spiritual healer? And I reference a book by a chap called Robert Connor, a wonderful book called Jesus the Sorcerer, Exorcist and Prophet of the Apocalypse. And it was published in Oxford in 2006. And yes, I believe, as Robert Connor sort of indicates, Jesus was drawing on esoteric or occult wisdom. Some people call it magic, which in English the word druid is a magician. And I talk about how many people have been accused of magic because we don't understand how it works. You know, you might say someone like Stephen Tickle, the medium, is a magician, and there are people that know how to interact with other dimensions and other worlds around us. And I'm sure Jesus was trained in those techniques. And in the text I go into where was he trained? How? Who by? He was connected with the Essenes. There were three major branches of Judaism at the time. There were the Pharisees, who were very particular about the text of the law, but they all orally interpreted it. They were high intellectuals, but they sort of quibbled about the details of everything. Then there were the Sadducees, who ran the temple and were the elite, who really didn't bother with spirituality. It was about doing the right rituals, paying your taxes, you know, keeping everything ordered. The Sadducees were the sort of political realists of the day, the Tory party, if you want. But then there were the Essenes, who were the people's most favourite, and they were the healers. They were free healers. They lived for prayer and spirituality, and believed that you could contact God. You didn't have to go to the temple in Jerusalem. Everyone had that access. And this, you know, the evidence I present in the commentary is that Jesus was from that lineage. And it's interesting, scholars have pointed out, that he rants against Pharisees and Sadducees, virtually every other page of the Gospels. Woe to you, Pharisees and scribes. He never once criticises the Essenes. He never once mentions, woe to you, Essenes. Why? Well, obviously, he is one. And we know they were based in Qumran, one of their major places, which I've been to. We know that they were highly literate. They had all the esoteric texts. They had the Book of Enoch, which I've done commentary on, and he was reading all this stuff. And that talks about apocalypse as in unveiling. That's the Greek origin of the word. It means the kingdom of God is among us. We can access these realms if we cultivate the right relationship with our visioning. And they also had traditions in Egypt, the Essenes. So it all makes sense, and that's, anyway, I've uncovered all this in the commentary, which is, I assure you, nothing like this has ever been done. Even Rudolf Steiner in his lectures on Gospel of Matthew didn't, because it's 120 years since Steiner wrote. Loads of stuff has been discovered. He didn't know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were only found after his death. So it's fascinating. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found the books of Enoch, you see. So that's that. That was fascinating. And I've just finished the book of Mark. I've done the commentary on Mark now, which I'll publish in this coming week in a book form. It's only half the length of Matthew because it's a shorter gospel. But it's great. I like Mark. And I think it was written under the supervision of St. Peter in Rome. And, you know, it's a very complementary text to Matthew, but Matthew has got more meat and richness of texture in it, and I think was the first of the Gospels. Okay, let's do one of the 99 names of peace, which is the work I dreamt up with Sophia, and let's choose a number between 1 and 52, if you want.
37.
37, okay, let's have a look. So each of the chapters is a language, first and foremost. And we've got the Sumerian language, as it happens, which is one of the earliest written languages in history in southern Iraq. And what the thing does, it explains the Sumerian language. There were two main words. There was niha, which was from a root meaning rest or repose, from Akkadian, nihum, meaning peace or security. And this is related to the name Noah, which means rest in Hebrew, because the Sumerians adopted Akkadian vocabulary into their language. Another word was selim, to be or make in good shape, healthy and complete. Another Akkadian loan word. Sumerian was spoken, we know, from, in writing even, from about 3500 BC onwards. And I give the whole history of the language, how we know, the discovery of tablets with cuneiform writing on, and Leonard Woolley and people digging up these ancient cities of Ur. And also a lot of the Bible books have stories that go back to Sumerians. So fascinating language. And I give the words for not just the word peace, but also related words like tranquility, rest, reconciliation, healing in Sumerian. Now it's associated with a project, as number 37, which happens to be the World Peace Gardens Network, which was founded by my friend Geoffrey Gale from Totnes in Devon, and it's a network of World Peace Gardens. Why is it associated with Sumerian? It's because the Sumerians invented agriculture. Their water engineering was such. They had canals, and they loved the fertility of the land. And they had deities that, concerned about life. The whole Garden of Eden story is a Sumerian kind of thing. Their idea of heaven is a garden. And why not have a network of World Peace Gardens? So that was the project that I'm now helping move along. And Sophia, my late daughter, was the secretary of us, but she is having to help from the heavenly worlds. We have a new secretary who was a dear friend of Sophia's called Sally Dodds, who's going to be the new secretary. And we're having a meeting on August the 12th. If anyone wants to get involved with the World Peace Gardens, it's a live project. And I'd love to, have a garden somewhere near here, get, build it up. So, yeah. So that's number 37, Sumerian and the World Peace Gardens Network. Right. Any questions, comments on any of that before we go on?
I was just slightly thinking when you talked about the Pharisees, are they the original Orthodox?
They would be the ancestors of the average Orthodox Jewish
Yes.
rabbi now.
Yeah.
They were the rabbis of the day. And they looked on Jesus as a slightly wild young thing who brought in strange ideas.
Yeah.
Had to be disciplined. Yeah, but he said, and his followers said, no, he was the original Orthodox one. The word orthodox means going straight to the truth. Orthos, straight. Doxa, truth. And it's a term Aristotle used. To be orthodox in philosophy is you go straight to the truth. You don't beat around the bush.
But when you're ultra-Orthodox,
I mean, the thing about, of course, defining whether you're orthodox or a heretic, then the whole thing becomes problematic, because whoever's in charge and has the power and the wealth can then define the other guys as the heretics. And unfortunately, that's happened in all the boxes. I mean, in every branch of knowledge, you have the orthodox Marxists versus the unorthodox Marxists. You have the orthodox Christians versus the unorthodox. I think we need to reopen the conversation and find out how to get to truth. Let's not argue about who's going the straightest way. And also, sometimes it's nice to go in a circular fashion, because in the Druid world we like spirals. That's their sacred diagram.
yeah, you always come around and have a look at, oh, so that's what it looked like.
Yeah, and you want to, and you can, by a spiral, you come around the same thing later
Yeah.
on and see it from a new
You pick it up,
perspective.
yeah, exactly.
We're all spiral beings, and that's, I think, the giveaway is on the fingers of our hands, the whirls of fingerprints are spiral shaped, and so is the line of the hair. And the spiral seems to be the fundamental shape of the universe, as in the galaxy we're in a giant spiral, which is part of other giant spirals. And so, but orthodoxy, if we redefine orthodoxy as a spiral pattern, it means to accept that that is how the spirit interacts with matter, creates spiral shapes. And it's about pattern and beauty. And so anyway, but no, good question.